Welcome everybody to the Breakpoint developer live stream. We will be playing our game Breakpoint in the background, a retro revival and tribute to classic twin-stick arcade games like Geometry Wars. I'm your host Nick, one half of our studio developing the game. I'm joined by Ed, the other half of the studio.
Hello.
We're also joined by Andrew Goodenough, Seattle-based indie game developer on Dragon Tamer Tactics. Andrew, how you doing today?
Hello, I'm happy to be here. What's up, guys?
Not too much, except for playing our game. How's developing on Dragon Tamer Tactics going?
I am here in Seattle. I'm working on a separate game called Dragon Tamer Tactics, a turn-based strategy RPG about collecting little monster dragons and having
Little
them
monster
help
dragons.
with you. Yeah. It's
Cool.
the biggest appeal of the game. It's just that you get to befriend cool dragons and then fight through like a Wild West frontier.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that about it. Before we
Yeah.
go into a lot of that complex business, walk me through a little bit of your history in game development.
Yeah, I for a long time didn't think I'd be able to do game development as a job, and then as
Welcome to like everybody.
I know, right?
We just didn't take it seriously. I mean, no one knew, right?
No.
How to do any of this stuff.
I
Game
studied
development academics were so non-existent.
And it wasn't that long ago that game development was like way less accessible. Like it's amazing in just like the last 10 years how free and available and like helpful the internet is for like beginning developers. I remember a time when I was young, I was like, how do I put a box on the screen? That's all I want to know. And I like was scoring C++ docs to be like, how do I WebGL, OpenGL, SDL, like I just want to put a box on the screen. Why is this so tough?
Yeah, no, totally, absolutely. YouTube, the home of YouTube poop, but also lots of tutorial videos for all sorts of things. Of debatable usefulness, but what's up? Yeah,
every dumb question has been asked already, which is
right. Yes.
Some of the not dumb ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you just didn't take it seriously, I guess, for a little while, and as you were growing up. So what changed that mentality, I guess?
I started working at Amazon.com at a very normal 9-to-5 computer science position, helping with like their retail website. And then Amazon.com started in a game studio.
Oh,
They just recently launched their game on Steam. If you guys are on Steam, Crucible is now playable. Yes. And it's free to play, so do check it out. I worked at Amazon Game Studios from when I started for about 4 years.
Were you there when Crucible was being developed? Was that the time?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, and I helped out here and there for a lot of their like server-side stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. That was a long road. It really made me realize, and it taught me a lot of skills that I needed to like work on games, but more just the confidence that I could do it myself. There's nothing quite like being in a huge studio to get perspective on all the different jobs that you need.
Yeah.
Right.
So
no, I would totally believe that.
About a year ago now, this time last August, I quit Amazon Game Studios and I went full time to work on my own indie stuff. Previously, I was just doing a lot of my own indie. It's a huge jump. It's terrifying. I did a lot of game jams before. Like I love game jams. I still organize a lot of game jams. But I just want to make something bigger than Weekend. I love Weekend game jams, but I think like my portfolio has like 42 game jams that I've done.
42?
It's so many.
That's insane. That's a
Most
lot
of them were like
game jam projects.
One summer in 2017, I did like a game jam every other weekend. And I had it was insane. I burnt out so hard. Don't do it, kids.
How many jams would you say you did that summer?
That was like most of them. That was like a good 19.
Okay, wow. You just hunted them down, sought them out, and then just bit into all of them.
Absolutely.
Was there anyone that was so? Dragon Tamer Tactics was the result of a more actual, obvious, deliberate approach to game development. Was there anything that you did during that time that you actually finished to a full degree, or were all of them kind of just game jam projects? Somewhat unfinished.
Almost all of them were game jam projects, and notably unfinished. Like unlike Breakpoint, where you guys took a game jam project and finished it, I had like a strong policy of like the weekend's over, the game is over.
Right. No, absolutely. I totally understand that. We've done that with some of our projects too.
But also, when you're doing that many jams, like you can't afford to go back to them.
Right.
I have so much respect for like finishing the thing right.
People, there's only so much finite time that people have.
Still.
But you know what they say, right? Your first 100 games or whatever, 10 games are going to be bad. So
I've made many tens of bad
exactly.
games.
I know. I was like, 10 is such a small number, I feel like, for... I mean, like, I honestly, I understand where people are like, I've only worked on a few game projects, you know, that's...
Right.
10 is even really impressive. I'm like, well, if it were my opinion, try, you know, really, really small projects. That will probably help you to understand the entirety of a game development process. That's just really hard to go. I mean, like, it's a lot of a learning process that people are kind of scared to go into learning, and I think that one of the reasons why I encourage people to go through that process is because repetition just helps ingrain a lot of good habits into you, and you don't really get that chance if you don't develop. Like, development is a lot of tests of habit, right? Waking up every day, having the discipline to go through even when you're not really feeling like you want to work. It's a lot like work, right? But except you're not being paid yet. That's indie game development. So you gotta have that kind of discipline to carry through. And I feel like that's why I encourage people to have small projects and not to be too precious about. That's probably one of the biggest things I think is my takeaway from being an indie is don't be too precious about your work. Like don't be too precious about showing your stuff off or feeling like your stuff is like immutable to criticism, because
it's not your last.
It's not your last work. Yeah, you got to be at least that confident in yourself that like this won't be the end. Like you're gonna make better work. So don't be afraid of showing people and then having people say like, it's kind of bad, and you're like, isn't it? It's so horrible. Like I'm working on a new project this weekend, and I'm hoping to, you know, flesh out all of the stuff. Yeah, exactly. Like to be able to turn around and say with some degree of confidence, say like, it is awful. I agree, but you know, even though I poured my heart and soul into this one, you know, next one will be the one, or you know, like I will work harder for sure. Like you've got to have that much confidence in yourself at least that you're going to pick yourself back up.
Your swan song is never going to be your first game. Especially won't be your first 10 games or 20 games. Like your swan song, if ever, is going to be like an incremental bit by bit, shipping little bits by bits.
Right. And that's not to say you shouldn't be careful about how you know, what kind of steps you move forward in game development world. I mean, like, let this not be said. Like, I will be first to say, like, I am not like a paragon of good virtues and like obvious wisdom. So take what I say, you know, with a grain of salt, obviously, but it's just been my experience that you've got to be able to, you know, not hold your work too precious, because you've got to be able to work on multiple projects and go through multiple processes for game development, because rest in peace. I know.
It's all good.
F and chat, folks.
Yeah. Also, let it be known that I beat your score, Nick.
Oh!
You did. Nice. Lucky SOB.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's very welcome. I needed to know that this interval it's going to set aside some time for me to try to beat his score later.
Mentally prepared.
We'll see.
I've worked on a quantity of games, and with my policy of just time boxing a weekend of games, I started many games, but there's a lot of skills you don't realize for finishing a game.
Right.
And I think that's really the biggest effort about trying to do something that's more full and finished with Dragon Tamer Tactics and a lot of the other games I've worked on, is to like not just finish something, but to learn how to polish something. It's easy to you know, make the basic gameplay code, but to make it like, you know, intelligible and understandable and grokkable.
Right.
But
all of just the little ass aspects of the last 10%. Yes, dude, all of them. All of the unfun parts.
These menus, I'm gonna brag about these menus.
I know.
These menus. Look at these menus.
There were so many things. Yeah, it's not such a huge moment, but it's relevant now to mention that, like, for the remapping the buttons. I just find it to be funny because I was like, oh, I want you to be able to see your controller. I need there to be an image, and I want you to map more than one button, and it needs. I'm like, I'll lay out a scheme for you. I was talking to Ed, and then Ed is like, so just to be sure, you want this, right? You
really want to do this, right?
You really want to do this, right? I'm like, Good thing you asked that, because I think you do need to be able to have at least some level of like, just to let you know this is work. And I'm like, I know it's a lot of work. It's just, I'm glad you remind me, because that's important to understand. This doesn't come free, right? You gotta set some time aside to even do benign things that people are gonna skip over in less than 15 seconds and just be like, of course it should be there. And it's like, you're right, it should be. But that was effing hard. Like, that was way harder than you realize. And not that you should care, but just saying, if anybody is listening about what it takes to do games, it's like, this stuff is harder than you think. It doesn't, like, there are people out there who are entirely dedicated to UI and UX, and there's a reason for that.
I'm not gonna say care about my menus. Care about my menus.
I mean, we did not extensively touch into the menus in our previous projects, so this was a good experience for that.
Yeah, so I guess to your point, Andrew, about finishing projects being its own skill, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, there are aspects you just sort of conveniently skip over because you realize, you're like, I don't know what's gonna have to mess around with these kind of things, like remapping controls and stuff like that. When you finish a project, all of those little things come to bite you.
Yeah, and it was definitely something we hadn't encountered until this project either.
Yeah, for sure.
We have a mutual friend, Robert Ackley, who I've game jammed with a couple times. I think I met you through that game jam for a global game jam last year.
That's actually correct, yes.
Yeah.
And we made Elf's Return Home, yeah.
Elf's Return Home is great because after that jam, Rob went back and finished that game.
Yeah. We spent a lot more work, so.
And like, I never do that with any of my game jams. And so now I have, of all the game jams I've done, that's one of the most finished ones I can point at and share.
Yeah, that's
most of my game jams, I feel I can't share as well. Yeah, and that's fine.
No, that's totally fine. You have to be able to point at your work and know where they stand in your like collective hierarchy of this one's good. This one I don't show very much, but it's still like a lesson. It's still a lesson that I learned a lot of stuff from. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then eventually, I guess you were working at Amazon and you decided to make that jump to full-time indie, I guess?
Yeah.
So was that, what kind of conscious decision or unconscious, I don't know, were you, like, what kind of decision was that?
Nah, I had I was facing an issue where I was doing both my day job at Amazon and then like every weekend I was doing like hobbyist game development or game jams. And I was diagnosed in 2017 with like early onset carpal tunnel, which happens so much in this industry. And it came to a point where I was like, I can't keep, using my hands every day, 24/7, weeknights and weekdays and weekends.
Yeah.
And so for my last few months at Amazon, I moved into like a management position, and I really enjoyed that. I did less coding, but I just really, really missed like the creative parts of it. So part of me going full indie was that I can use my day hours for the code work that I want to do instead of this work I was being paid to do at Amazon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And also, I'm young and I have no dependents, and so like
now's the time.
Now's the time.
Yeah, for sure.
I studied business in college, and it was so weird having gone, to do. And I particularly studied entrepreneurship. I had a lot of friends and classmates who were all like entrepreneurs and doing startups, and either half of them, they had failed or they had succeeded. And in the 4 years,
one of those two.
It was one of those two things. They at least tried, right? They at least tried.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
My time at Amazon was me just doing a really nice, stable stuff, learning a lot, meeting a lot of good folks.
Funding yourself.
I wanted to try. I wanted to either fail or succeed. Have fun doing it. So.
And how has that journey been so far?
Terrifying. It's every morning.
You wake up every morning and it's like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
You question everything, like, is this worth your time? Because now I'm no longer on Jeff Bezos' dollar. I'm on my own dollar. I gotta make it worth it.
Yeah.
I'm also like solo. I'm working entirely by myself right now. So if I stop and do a day of code, I'm not doing art. If I stop to do art, I'm not doing code. So
that's true.
You take a break, then you're not doing either, and you're like, wow, I'm wasting time right now.
You feel super guilty. Yeah. That's really tough too as a solo game developer. So I mean, like you've obviously, I'm sure, have talked to, including ourselves, have talked to other developers that are not solo. How do you?
I'm so jealous.
Okay.
The call last night with Patrick, you guys guys shared a lot of like, both the benefits and the struggles of working with someone else.
Right.
But
this was our interview yesterday, you mean? Right?
Yes, yes.
Gotcha.
For those of you who tuned in last night. But the benefits far outweigh the costs. But it really is just like finding the right collaborator. And
right.
I don't feel like I know someone who I'd want to collaborate with that way. A lot of those people are my friends. I don't want to like mix my business world with my friend world.
I see.
That's such a hard door to open and close.
Yeah, I totally understand. I think that's one of the difficult things about indie scenes too, is it's not just meeting new people and then like, oh, you like the same things I do. It's also like personality and making sure you actually are able to work together. It's not just about having a fun time, every time you get together, whenever there's a social, you guys order the same drinks and have the same opinions about the same games. It really is like, when you have a problem, how do you resolve it? And is it healthy? Are you guys mature enough to actually walk away from that like disagreement just fine? Because like being able to figure out those things is actually really, I would say, one of the bigger things about just in general business partnerships. If anybody has played a match of Dota, they realize what it's like to have somebody walk out on a match and just be like, okay, now we're screwed. Like, the game's over. It's basically just gonna be like a really slow death if we try hard. Like, that's, so I mean, like, the less people you have, the more imperative it is that these people really work together really well, because you don't have a whole lot of people picking up the slack. You have no one else, in fact, picking up the slack. So it's
F and chat, everybody.
I know. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it's nice to be able to, at least I think that's one of the reasons why when me and Ed decided to work together, it really was about agreeing on our work process. We kind of understood about the way that we both approach work necessities and how we approach problems, and also just like agreeing to understand like how we fit with each other's workflows. Because we happen to just, in this case, I do a lot of art and design, and Ed does a lot of like really heavy tech stuff, including tech art. So there's a lot of it, including having an opinion about mine. So he's not afraid to actually express that, and I encourage that for sure. So it's about having that relationship and keeping it open, and just like knowing that we have leeway for various things, even as we own our various aspects of game development. Like, I will, like, oh yeah, I'm a game designer, but that doesn't mean this isn't a cooperative relationship with this. Like, we both work on the design, because it's very much an input based thing. Like, I don't just put the foot down and just say like, this is the way it is, because I know, and I mentioned this yesterday, but I know that my call isn't the end all be all. It has to be a collaborative process. And I can see how difficult that would be with solo game development. I can only guess. I mean, that's what I was before I met Ed, right? I was just a solo game developer trying to, I was working in tech at the time also. And there's a lot of people that I would talk to. It was actually kind of interesting, because even though I worked at a games company, there was very few people I could actually really talk to about game design. Not so many people would really think about games. I'm not saying they didn't think about games the way that I did, but they didn't consume games the way I did. I'm very consummate about being very academic when I play games, and it's hard to talk to people who are mostly just consumers of games. Geez.
I ran into a bullet from the back there.
Straight into that, dude.
Whoops. Anyway, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Thought we wouldn't notice.
So that's actually one of the reasons why I decided to really explore meetups. So that's Enter Seattle Indies. So this is kind of that's kind of the area where I met both Ed and you, actually. So I got involved with independent game development through Meetup, and Seattle Indies group kind of showed me how a lot of other people who are not necessarily going through the same struggles, although they were, but also just trying to develop games on their own and doing it in an atmosphere where other people were interested not just in the game consumption side. This wasn't like a game book club. This was game development. This was talking explicitly about developing games. So this was back-end conversation to a lot of other people. You know, not too many other people are interested in that kind of conversation. Like I remember having a conversation when I used to work at Microsoft with somebody who really liked Borderlands, and I was asking him, like, so what is it about Borderlands that makes you like just interested in like that loot process? Why are you so? And I just was curious about like just asking people about
other people's thoughts. Like,
other people's thoughts. Like, so what makes you compelled to play these games? Because I'm just curious about like I have opinions about these, but I want to hear them voiced by other people, right? And so I was asking him like what makes you interested in the loot structure specifically? Like why, say for example, why a loot structure where it's random drops, Diablo style, as opposed to, let's say, a crafting system where a lot of the things that dropped were materials, say for example, and you could just craft stuff. Why not that?
No, this is a replay, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so he tried to answer, and he had a lot of trouble really articulating his point. And then he said, I was like, you know what, tell you what, why don't you I'll just give you to the end of the day to just like figure out why that is the case, and just tell me, like, I'm just curious if you can figure out. And then at the end of the day, before he left, he like turned around and he said, you know, I think I just really like finding a pearlescent weapon. And I was like, okay, all right, like that doesn't answer anything for me necessarily. It more is just like you've basically admitted that you've given into that hamster wheel of like that treadmill of just like, oh, you know, like there's something lights up in your brain when you find something really cool, and it's like, okay, yeah, you've basically given yourself to that Skinner box. I'm not saying that that's like terrible, but the fact that you wouldn't even know like right away that you're like, I just like Skinner box type of things. I just like, if you had said that, then I would obviously know straight up. You did your homework about like what kind of systems and mechanics drive players to like want to play one thing over another, and why you're compelled to, like, from a design sense, right? Like what would drive a person towards being interested in loot structures? Why would you care?
But of course we need people, you know, who don't think about it as much either.
No, exactly. And that was like almost all of my conversations. That was the problem.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's something we're interested in as game developers, right? And not like, it's not that, oh yeah, the people who don't think about it are inferior. Let me be clear. It really is just like, we want to talk to people about this.
And I still have fun. Right, exactly. I still have fun having those kinds of conversations. The difficulty was I had no other conversations. Right. There was no other kinds of conversations I would have. And as a person who was interested in development, it was hard for me to just accept, like, this is it, so this is it. I'm just always ever going to just talk about how much fun I'm having in a game. I'm not going to talk about how they're made. So that's why... When you open the Pandora's box of game design and you start to see the matrix of how the games are, like what decisions the game designers make, you actually sometimes have fun. Yeah. So like maybe if you don't open that door if you want to enjoy a certain game. Right. But still, like, if it's something that you want to also, you know, if it's your art form and it's something you want to like, express yourself in and craft within. Right. It helps to familiarize yourself with those kind of decisions. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a little bit like the magician's dilemma. Like, does letting people know about the process feel good for the end user or the viewer? And in some cases, for certain people, it does. I think for me, that was the kind of thing it was for me. I liked being able to see the sort of like back end of things and how they worked. Not necessarily because I was curious about, like, oh, I want to be able to build these same systems, but because I was just like, I like design of games, and I'm interested in how to kind of like help generate a certain type of response to games, to people in when people are playing games. So like, what makes a horror game tick, right? Like, why are people scared when they know it's not real? Like, same thing with the movie, right? It's not real. You still jump because you have inherent desires or fears, right? This giant spider goes towards your face, you kind of like, you just freak out because it's not. You have like biological responses even like to certain things. I remember this is almost like really not related at all, but I remember I was watching Harry Potter, and like there's just a really quick moment in a scene where he's playing they're playing Quidditch, and then the ball moves towards the screen really quickly, and I actually remember like pushing my head to the side and being like, man, I just was like a complete idiot in the movie theater trying to avoid a fake ball coming out of my face.
The person behind you is like, that guy is a complete wuss.
Complete idiot, yeah. What a noob. Can't even tell movies from real life.
You always hear about
Harry
like
Potter's not real.
the first audiences of the old
movie on the way to the train, right?
Yeah, and everyone freaked out, and we're all like, haha, they freaked out at a movie.
Right.
But we still do that.
Yeah, totally.
We still totally do that.
If it was a train movie, I'd freak out.
If it was coming towards your face, I mean, that ball was coming towards my face. Come on, man.
Right,
that
bludger was coming towards my face. Screen, I suppose.
It's huge. Yeah, it's life size. It's bigger than life size. People's faces are hundreds of times the size of a real human face.
So I'm curious about your experiences with this, Andrew, being at Amazon Game Studios, which is, more explicitly a place where people think about games. Because I have a very similar experience to Nick, where being at Microsoft, I didn't have anybody to talk to about this stuff. Like, in fact, anytime I brought up working on stuff after work, people would immediately just change the topic basically.
Yeah.
It's just like nobody wants to think about it. So yeah, like at Amazon, at a game studio specifically, what was that like?
There was certainly a
Although we
lot
don't
of
necessarily think about Amazon as a game studio.
Sure, but I mean, there was a game studio within Amazon technically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are so many good people at Amazon Game Studios from like all over the industry. Amazon like worked really hard to pick up a lot of like chief talent from around the game industry. So a lot of them were very like veteran, and so a lot of them were very much like I have done my time, and I want to go home and be with my family and stuff. And I have nothing but respect for that.
Oh yeah,
sure.
Especially if like you not only did you do a lot of work today, but you've done a lot of work in your career to get to the point where you could just do a lot of work today and not crunch.
Right. Not have to think about it afterwards.
Yeah, there was a group though that did board game design, and they were always fun at lunch. Okay. Yeah, we'd like someone make I made a board game. I don't know if it's fun yet. Let's play. We're like, oh, it wasn't fun. And we learned why. Yeah. I think when you work at a game studio, it does feel like you're talking about work. Mm-hmm. I do calls with Ed and a couple other friends every so often, and it's me hanging out with friends during the quarantine, right? So like, it's good for me to be seeing friends, but also I'm constantly worried, like, am I overworking right now? Is it technically work?
Yeah, I mean, like, so when you think about your indie game development as you're doing it right now, how do you feel about? How do you calculate how much is too much work, though? Yes.
So like, we were talking earlier about like, when you're a solo dev, everything is your time is everything. You're 100% the project.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't want to crunch, right? I don't want to be overworking. I don't want to burn out. I'm in this for the long term. So like, I'm trying not to do too much work, but even just thinking about your project is work. So if I'm in the shower thinking about my project, like, should I stop myself?
Time on it.
Yeah. And like, it's important just to have like a diverse portfolio of things for you to care about.
That's true. Yeah.
So
are there hobbies that take your mind away from games?
There was, and then the quarantine happened.
Oh.
Right,
I can't do like all my theater
like
stuff.
Hiking and things like that.
Yeah. Can't do ultimate frisbee.
That's true. That's true.
So it's been all game o'clock during the pandemic, folks.
Yeah.
I suspect that's one thing a lot of creative people are having trouble with.
Exactly. Yeah, is knowing and having to replace all of their other standbys that otherwise have.
Right.
I mean, like, I'm comfortable generally staying inside and playing games, but I also do know that, like, it has had a negative impact on me not being able to just walk outside and know. Because I remember there was just one day, well, actually, no, it was my birthday. Yeah, it was my birthday back then, when we decided to just go out and drive, and I thought to myself, just as we were watching people on the street, just walking around, and there weren't too many, but I just thought, like, it's nice to just be reminded that there's other people, and then to like, think about, like, else. Yeah, just anybody else than just, like,
whoever you're stuck with.
And whoever you're stuck with, and just being like, look, this is fine, but also just like I wonder what they're doing. I wonder where they're coming from. I wonder what they bought at the grocery store. And you just think a little bit. You don't think about yourself. You don't think about your problems. You think about other people. You think about what other people are doing, what other people's lives are, and it's just kind of freeing not to be, I'm not like a narcissist, so I don't think about myself 24/7. But even if I was, it would just be so tiring just thinking about that stuff.
I can tell you it is.
I can tell you from experience, yes. It's awesome, but also it's tiring. It's
hard to think how great I am.
All the time, yes. So, moving to indie game development, why indie game development? Why not shoot yourself into the net of like, oh, I should go back to school and learn to be an artist or a programmer to work at a big studio?
Why convinced that, because I've always wanted to do my own business. I always wanted to do my own startup. And when I was in college, I thought I was going to do like a traditional San Francisco,
startup kind of stuff.
Yeah, some bubble, try to disrupt some innovate.
In the tech industry, yeah.
But and as much as I still think I would enjoy that, I wouldn't be like creating art. I just want to make stuff that other people know about.
Okay.
I want to exist in other people's lives and have made something that touched them.
So you want to have a more clear, evident footprint that it was you. It wasn't just like a you as part of a big team. Where you're like, look, I made that paper bag. Was that what you were saying?
No, that's a good. There's another conversation to be had in there, which is like, do I want 100% of the credit? And that's not the case.
Okay.
I'm quite happy to work with other people. I miss working with other people.
Gotcha.
But no, it was more that like, if I was just making like a better mousetrap, no one cares about your mousetraps.
Oh, I see.
When you create a piece of art, yes, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make,
It was something that maybe big companies would not necessarily support or wouldn't have like as big of an incentive to back because it's not financially a good business decision to make like a walking sim or something that's maybe meaningful to a few people but isn't very financially or frugally responsible to continue to make.
A lot of the game studios I've worked at, Amazon Game Studios included, has like, they have a big budget. So you have to make something big. Like I would many times, one of the teams I worked on when I was at Amazon Game Studios, I was so proud of, was a team for Twitch, which Amazon owns. Hi all our Twitch viewers. And so I worked very closely with Twitch for a while to make games that you could play on Twitch. And they were so cool. But that team got canceled eventually for and not for the lack of quality of the games, it's just that the games weren't big enough for what Amazon was doing. For the amount of people and time that we're putting on, you have to do something big or go home. Like that's how big game studios are.
Right. So that's actually a really interesting point to make, and I think that's something that a lot of people forget. That's something that I forget from time to time, but it's also just something that. So one point I think that's important to understand about why indie games work the way that they do is because is because there's a certain spectrum of game that has to come back in terms of financial revenue when you're supporting a team that is large. So let's say for example you are a small team and you got together to just make this cool little indie game, and then you were like, I'm just gonna hire my friends, right, to just make this game, and maybe a few extra people just to do sound design or some extra stuff, or contract some stuff out, or maybe you're not an artist and you're just like, let me just contract some portraits for some stuff, and then I just need some help to finish my game, and so you'll do something like that, and then you'll finish that, and they'll be like, that was good, we got some financial results from that was great. I want to make something a little different this time, maybe a little bit bigger, and then you hire on a little more people, and then your second game comes out and it's maybe 5 times as big because you had bigger ideas, and maybe you're just cohesive as a team, right? You're just better as a team, and so your team is now bigger. Now you have to pay all of those people, and so all of those people, you need to be financially responsible as the head of that studio to make sure that like all of those people are gonna go home with money to buy food the next day. And so, or else you let some people go. And that's, at this point, that conversation starts to look like, these are all my friends, because these are all people that I've worked with or I respect enough to have hired, obviously. So you don't want to hire people that you don't care about. I mean, like, that's, maybe you do that when you're, you know, super head honcho of a big studio and you don't actually see the people you're hiring anymore. But it's a different thing when, even as you're growing as a studio, you're starting to get big enough to basically say, I need to have a project that's big enough to sustain my studio. So we can no longer make games that are like 2D side-scrolling Metroidvanias that have, of course they have a standardized set of people who are interested in them, but will it be enough to give us money for the next project if we work on this game? That's a question that a lot of people have to ask, and I don't know necessarily that, like, it's, so to your point about, like, you know, making something that's meaningfully impactful on certain people's lives, you can afford to do that as an independent game developer. You can, because as one of the only, in fact, right now, as the only person making this stuff, you already know how much is going into these projects. So you can say, like, it costs this much, you know, I can afford this much time.
Even just on my scope, though, it's just even just one dev. Like, there are still ideas that even I can't do if I'm trying to be a business. This is all a side effect of us living in a capitalist society. But like, the Game Jam games I made, I could make the stupidest shit, and it would be fine. Like, and I do miss those times of like not having to worry about whether an idea had like brought it. Like, I remember at the start of the stream, I was like, "Hey, monster collection tactics game." Like, oh, you know, like I had to like sell a particular hook and part of it that would like, be worth the price tag I'd put on it. Like, when you do, you know, a business for your indie studio and you want to keep your friends employed, you need to make sure that your game is like marketable and sellable, and like you can't just do anything. Even for small indies, you can't just do anything.
Absolutely.
Like, it's even more of a problem when you're a big studio in the AAA industry. So
that's for sure. I think that does need to be said, because it made it sound like, when I was saying, it made it sound like as an indie dev you don't have to think about those things. If anything, you might have to you might have to think about those things even harder than those big guys.
But there are doors that are open that aren't to others.
There are certain doors that are open. I guess that's more the point I was making about that. There are certain things that you can afford to do as an indie developer, and it sounds to me like that's what was appealing to you when you were thinking about going indie as opposed to working for the man.
The man pays well, it is to be noted.
Yes, there might be real reasons why you work for the man. And then do hobby stuff on the side. You could do hobby stuff on the side. That's in fact many indie game developers' careers.
Yes.
To do this stuff on the side.
And you're very valid indie devs if you do that.
Absolutely. That was many of us and the people that we knew before we, you know, jumped into full-time indie. That's it. You're not any less of a developer just because of, you know, you're doing this on the side. There's totally people who have beloved hits and indie devs who do these sorts of things on the side. It's all the more respectful that you can do that, because that's really hard to do, to spend extra time on. That's just, in fact, I mean, like, one of the reasons to go full-time indie is so that you can just really focus on it without the distraction of your main work. But that's, you know, the fact is that, like, if you're doing this while you're working, that's just extra like mental energy you have to be spending on all these projects and things like that. So it's not an enviable thing to have to do that and then just say at the end of your workday, okay, you know, I've done my, you know, like retail job, or I've done even working like tech support at Microsoft, or any other job, and then go home and say, okay, I've got to work on my project. I've just, you know, I'm really invested in this. I'm really tired, but also I really want to give myself to this project. I'm
super curious. Because I did the full-time thing back in August, and at the exact same time, Ed went full-time as well.
Yeah.
I
think it was more like September, but yeah.
Was it? It was like just during
It was
PAX.
like very close. It was like maybe within a week.
You're right.
Like, what did you have a certain rationale for going full indie yourself?
Was that to me, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, it really was the thing where I was just working at Microsoft and then going home and working some more. And you know, I could do it most of the time, but there were days where I was like, this sucks.
This is just too much. Yeah.
And you were actively working with Nick during this time, right?
Yeah, we were already working together.
Yeah, that's right.
And were you were already full-time, right, Nick?
I was full-time AD at the time, yeah.
Yeah. So there was like a weird disconnect between like you and your partner, like the hours you could put in. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about it for a long time, even like years before.
Count the days, dude.
Yeah.
Ed talked to me about that before, so.
But it really was just like, I need time to not be doing work, basically.
So, how much on this stream can we talk about your other games?
I think it's
any
fine.
amount.
Like, I don't,
So
none of them are secret.
tell me about your studio. What's your plans for your guys' studio?
Oh, you mean concurrent games?
Yeah.
No, we're not.
We're not
doing. I mean, like we have, like I think we've thought about other things that we've done, but all of them are like right now. Like we're mostly just finishing off Breakpoint.
Too soon. Okay.
And the other projects, other things that we've worked on or are working on or will think about working on are just things where it's like, we've worked on this before, do we want to pursue making this more of this? Or do we want to like maybe pivot this project into something that's more salvageable or something like that? So they're all, most of our thoughts and the conversations that revolve around like the things that we're going to be doing next revolve, well, at least have been revolving around like what do we want to do in relationship to the things that we have already done. Right. I guess is kind of like because there's plenty of projects spanning quite a few different kinds of genres that
many different genres,
yeah, surprisingly, that we're like, we could do this. I mean, it really depends on what we think, because I mean, one of our goals as a studio is not only to just make games, because we were very similar to you, where we're like, we want to make games that are impactful to people, like even as we're making, you know, a Geometry Wars look-alike for some people.
I wouldn't call it that.
I think look-alike
degrading
is
here. I know.
accurate.
I'm being kind of self-degrading, but it's even as we are making a game that is very similar to Geometry Wars, we're still, one of the reasons why we're doing it is because we're like, we know that people have a strong nostalgia for this kind of game, but we're still doing certain things with this game genre that we think are interesting within the whole spectrum of gaming culture. Like we changed the formula, like we didn't just straight up borrow like, oh, it's just a twin stick shooter, you just shoot stuff and then, you know, here's what this other game does. No, I mean, like we made it melee for a reason, because it's interesting and different. Like that's it. We're trying to do interesting things even as we are still making a game that's very similar to other games. So like
F and chat.
And another one in 1 second.
Get wrecked, I know, and it, oh, there we go, there it is. That's the time's up. Time's up, death. Yeah, so we still want to make interesting, meaningful experiences to people, but we're still very much, I think the admission between like a lot of the, when we've looked at a lot of our games anyways, is that we make games that are very explicitly focused on feedback to the player, especially like visual feedback. So like, you know, when you got hit, you know, when you hit an enemy, you know how much damage it did, you know what exactly you should be doing at any given time, not because we told you, but because it felt right to do. Like that's the kind of thing we really want to focus on, is experiences that only games can give you, because when you press that button, when you press the trigger, when you pressed A or something like that, something happened, and that something felt impactful, it felt strong. And so sometimes when I say like meaning and feeling in games, it isn't just like, oh, like it meant something. It's not just emotional. It's actually more instinctual. Some of those things that I'm talking about are more instinctual. Like when I pressed the button, it felt good to just jump, or when I hit an enemy, it felt good to just, that impact felt cool. Like there are things like that we're really heavily focused on, and we bring that experience to us across all of the projects that we've had. So when we think about our new projects, it's more just like within that spectrum, but in addition to making those kinds of games, one big thing that we thought also was, we need to make games financially feasible for us. So like it needs to be, that's kind of the reality. So
thanks, capitalism.
So, you know, like insofar as like it is not so much to like support, you know, only the two of us, but in addition to the contracts we make for, you know, our additional stuff, you know, like thank you Colin and Mac, but like there's all of these things that we have to think about, but also it's just like will our project even make sense within the spectrum of indie gaming as it exists right now? Like, are people even interested in Breakpoint as a game? Is there a market for this? Like, what is trending right now? And I really don't like to bring up a word like trending because it makes it sound like we're just being trend chasers. Because in reality, most of our games are just like made in like a vacuum, and then we just evaluate afterwards, like, is this feasible? Should we pursue this for one reason or another? And then we sort of pivot certain choices internally towards things that people might like, but also some things that people might resonate with. That's an important thing to understand, is that like you don't have to give up creative control over your project just because you're thinking about money. That's not, like, not everything has to be mutually exclusive in that way. You know, obviously
there are certain conversation I love to have, because like the notion of selling your game at all does mean you're a sellout. Right? But like that's not bad, because you want to survive and live off our games.
Not in the traditional sense that people think about selling out. Like,
you're not selling out to the man, you're selling out to many, many, many men and women. You're not selling out to anyone first, but you know, if I make a game for one demand, that's a bad investment.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, like, it really depends on like what people consider to be indie game development and what is, because indie is such a shifting notion these days, isn't it? I mean, like, just we're seeing lots of teams that would never have fit the indie notion, you know, previously, when we're looking and thinking about like
very good
Studio Pixel and Daisuke Amaya and just being a businessman and making Cave Story or something like that, versus like Spelunky or, you know, like Grounded being featured in you know, Steam Games Festival, and it you know, it being and standing alongside lots of other indie game developers, or, you know, like other studios that are obviously comprised of industry veterans who have worked in the industry 15 plus years. You know, they're still indie in a lot of ways, even if you may not necessarily think about indie in that way. That's a spectrum of indie too, and that maybe they're just independently funded or independently developing games. That's okay. That's a type of indie too. Maybe not the type of indie you're interested in, but
we're not going to gatekeep what is or is not indie. We're not going to know Tree Scotsman this. But I will say, like, if you are game jamming and you make a game for no money, but you're just making it for the sake of making it, that's the truest indie there is.
that is very, very strongly in the sense of, like, I don't think a lot of people would doubt that that's super indie.
But it's just not sustainable. Like, one thing I'll call out is, like, even if you make art because you want people to be impacted by it, they need to care. So if you're a tree who falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, like, didn't make a sound. So even if you aren't selling out for money, you still need to be thinking about things like marketability and trends, because you want people to care about the things you're making.
And I think that's
something I've struggled with myself. Yeah, it's like it does feel like selling out in some respects. It really does. But
like making
at the same
something
time,
that other people,
like, just like, what do people like right now? Like, let me make that. Like that, you know. But at the same time, you do want people to care about the things you make. So there's just some amount of necessity to that.
I will say about trends, and I'm sure you guys know this as well, it's just like, if you make a game on a trend, you're too late. It takes so long to make a game that by the time you're done, it's going to be a new trend.
Well, I don't know about that. Monster Train is doing real well right now.
Whoa, we're not going to name names.
Hey, I'm not sorry. I don't mean to disparage them. I haven't played it, but it looks like a great game.
I like Monster.
A lot of people have been giving that a lot of kudos.
What I mean is, I think they prove that false, like, in a good way. Like, they managed to put a spin on something that is kind of
I'm very excited about
the Spire formula.
I love the Slay the Spire trend. That's the new, like, previously it was puzzle platformers was the indie go-to, right? Now it's all card battlers, and I love it.
Like card roguelikes.
I'm so bummed that the auto battler genre has not been like a trend.
Was that just something you really wanted to see?
I really wanted to see, like, a whole bunch of indie clones. I say that positively. Like, indies, like, they innovate. So it's not a clone. I shouldn't say clone. Just like indie innovation in that space. Like the card battlers we're seeing right now, the Slay the Spire-like games. There's so much innovation there. It's amazing.
Obviously, there's just so many people trying new and different things, and like people like you had talked about are just trying it without recourse or care for financial, like, oh, whatever, I'm just going to try this sort of thing, this random thing. wasn't Herman's game essentially that kind of game? It's
which
Herman?
one? There's another guy we know from the Seattle indie scene, I think.
Yeah, it was the being poor and having having the
dude, I can't even remember what the name of that game is.
Or whatever game.
Yeah,
it's not really busking. It's trying to flip a coin and using those coins to
modify the results of the card you get.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how to give the context for this. But
anyways, it's what I'm trying to say is that was a game jam game, and that had innovative, interesting things going on with it, and that was clearly not made with the idea of financial feedback in mind. Like, it wasn't made for money. It was, wow, that was interesting. Die and time up at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, sit silly. But yeah, there's a lot of decisions you have to make as an indie, and I think money is just one of them.
Yeah.
Money is just one of them.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. Dragon Tamer Tactics is an SRPG, correct? It's a strategy RPG in the vein of Fire Emblem or Advance Wars, maybe a little less Advance Wars because Advance Wars has many units. So you've played Fire Emblem Three Houses?
I have, yeah.
You have. Okay, so you and Ed can talk shop about this, but I'm just curious. Having played it, is there any lessons you learned from?
Oh yeah.
Like, okay, what are you carrying into Dragon Tamer Tactics that you've learned from Three Houses?
Nowadays when I play games, I actually take notes of just even the smallest nitpicks that I have. So I'm gonna pull up my Fire Emblem Three Houses.
Notes.
Yeah. Notes.
Yeah, and a lot of them maybe don't apply to Dragon Tamer Tactics, but maybe some of my other tactics games that I'll be building.
Okay.
My studio strategy is to build a core audience around one specific genre and reuse the same code base between all these games.
Oh, okay.
Dragon Tamer Tactics will not be my last tactics game.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And
it also was not the first.
Oh yeah, when I first went indie in August, I did a Hero Tactics. If anyone should know, my current work, Hero Tactics is free to play on mobile and on itch, and just a tight little tactics game, more in the vein of Advance Wars and Fire Emblem.
Yeah.
But the tactics genre, it has a deep family history tree, and so much so that a Final Fantasy Tactics style tactics game is completely different from an Advance Wars style tactics.
Yes.
You have to almost qualify, I'm of the family of Advance Wars.
Right. There's enough difference here.
Yeah.
To garner different types of fans.
So one thing I really liked in Into the Breach, which is for me my current favorite tactics game, was Into the Breach had was deterministic, but what that allowed it to do was have UI on the floor that showed what the enemy would be doing next turn. So you hit the end turn button, you knew exactly what they would be doing. There was no doubt. Generally, if you play a tactics game for 10,000 hours, you see the lines of the AI. You understand what the AI would do next turn. But most players don't reach that long. Into the Breach's determinism let it have UI that very clearly said what was and was not threatened.
Yeah.
So Fire Emblem Three Houses, this is a complaint about Fire Emblem Three Houses, is they had this really cool piece of UI that showed what an enemy was threatening, but it wasn't necessarily what the enemy would do at their turn.
Right.
So the enemy would say, this is something I could hit. It has a little target area with this little red arc that's I'm going to attack this my next turn. But if one of their other enemies attacked that enemy and killed it, then it would change its target to something else.
Right. It's what they're planning, but not necessarily what is actually going to happen. And Fire Emblem,
it's not deterministic. There's randomness, so maybe an enemy does crit and kill an enemy unexpectedly, right? So, the game wouldn't allow that piece of UI, and that really bothered me because you think you can rely on it and you can't.
Yeah. So does that mean you're making your games with deterministic results in mind, or are you thinking?
Sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Into the Breach is very, very deterministic in that the enemies dictate what they're going to do at the beginning of the turn, and they don't change. So mine will still have more of a traditional tactics game where the AI can change your mind depending on your actions. But I want to convey to the users that, guaranteed, this is what the enemy will do if you hit the end turn button right now.
Gotcha. Okay.
There's no doubt. And this will help teach the players about what is and is not threatened. You never want there to be, a surprise, I didn't know that was going to hurt.
Sure.
F in chat, folks.
Okay.
I appreciate you typing F in chat whenever that happens.
It's a counter at this point. in Twitch chat, Light Sentry 12 asks, is that kind of like Mario vs. Rabbids, where it's more like a tactics puzzle? And yes, totally. Mario vs. Rabbids is more like an XCOM, which is from the Advanced Wars family tree.
Right.
Where Advanced Wars, XCOM and Mario vs. Rabbids had a lot of randomization, but there was certainly like it very much exposed the odds to you, like very heavily, like this is the percent chance. Right. And a lot of like Fire Emblem, it's very like there's like complex math being like, okay, take their dodge percent and times it by their finger stat, and then minus that by their defense, and you're like, you're a computer.
Very stats oriented, yeah.
Please, you do the math. Like I don't want to break out my math book right now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's kind of the benefit of it running it on a computer as opposed to it being a board game, say, for example.
Like traditional tactics games are, you know, the family tree starts with D&D and tabletop games, right? Like, that's the OG spatial strategy.
Yeah,
and like all that math is all by hand, so. Yeah. We've inherited a lot of that complex D&D math when we moved to computers.
Yes, yeah. And we're fortunate that we don't have to roll those die anymore.
But dude, like, the anticipation curve of rolling a dice is just so good.
Yes, there's something lovely about holding the die in your hands and it being physical and knowing this was like, you threw those die. Yeah. That wasn't something else. That was your hands.
There's a trend in strategy games to simulate dice for the RNG,
like
just
literally
to give you that same like
physically.
anticipation. Because the RNG is like a second. The RNG is done. Like we've calculated. For those who don't know, RNG is random number generator, and like it pretends to be a dice and it rolls whatever D20 or D21 you want. But like a lot of strategy games will do the very hokey thing. I love it. I love the trend of being like, we're gonna roll a dice now in our computer game.
Yeah.
90% of my notes for Fire Emblem Three Houses is UI based, like what my complaints, like, oh, I didn't understand this at first, and the last 10% is all story, which I can't apply because I'm not writing a story for Dragon Tamer Tactics.
Oh, okay.
For those who don't, it's not immediately apparent. Dragon Tamer Tactics is a Pokemon-like game. It's going to be a story as lightweight as Pokemon story, where it's like you don't need any. You're just on an adventure. You're on an adventure with your dragons. You're gonna have a good time. Like. Doesn't get more deep than that. Ooh, that powerful dragon?
Yeah, that's good enough for me, honestly.
I don't need to say no more.
All right, well, we're approaching the end of the hour. Before we end, I guess I'll ask the question, do we want to do After Dark, Ed? Or do we want to
I think we're good.
Yeah. Okay,
let's take a break today.
Yeah. So, perfect. Yep,
unless you can make the call.
Nope, I think that's perfect for us. So, before we head off, though, is there anything you'd like to plug there, Andrew?
Follow me on Twitter. I'm twitter.com/EHGoodenough. EHGoodenough.
He's right there on the screen.
There it is.
Yep. And this has been Breakpoint. Thank you all for watching.
Yep. Remember that the demo is available on Steam right now. You could be playing exactly what I'm playing and get your score on the leaderboard.
Somebody is thrown.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm just waiting for somebody to beat my score.
Dethrone him. Yes.
Somebody was actually.
You can definitely do it, but.
And it was actually more than you. Somebody else had done it too.
Yeah, there's somebody else. Yeah, there's more people. Yeah.
Now that I've updated my score, though.
You gotta dethrone him again. Gotta just struggle for that crown.
One last F in chat.
Yeah.
I know, right? All right, well, thank you all for joining us. This is us signing off. This has been Nick, Ed, and Andrew. Thank you all.
Stay safe.